What could make the greatest hero forget his pride and rush into battle, risking everything? The death of Patroclus in Homer's Iliad is not just an episode from an ancient epic, but a moment that radically changed the course of the Trojan War and drove Achilles mad. This story reveals how personal loss can outweigh all differences and lead to far-reaching consequences. Now we will delve into the events to understand why the death of one man became a turning point in the legendary conflict. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let's get started. Patroclus was not just Achilles' shadow. According to legend, he was older, wiser, and served as an anchor for the hot-tempered demigod, keeping him from completely sinking into the abyss of rage. Their friendship began in childhood, in the palace of Peleus, Achilles' father. Patroclus ended up there against his will. As a boy, in a fit of rage while playing dice, he killed his peer and was banished from his home. Peleus took him in, and from then on, the boys grew up like brothers. Imagine the slopes of Mount Pelion, covered with dense forests. There, far from the hustle and bustle of the palace, they were raised by the wise centaur Chiron. He taught them not only the art of combat, the use of the spear and sword, but also medicine, music, and justice. While Achilles, the child of a goddess, easily mastered the martial arts, surpassing everyone in strength and agility, Patroclus diligently studied herbs and the art of healing wounds. He was the one who could calm his friend's wild temper, bandage his wounds, or simply sit silently beside him when he was overcome by dark thoughts. This bond stood the test of time and distance. When the call to go to Troy sounded, Patroclus went there not as an ordinary warrior, but as Achilles' terapon, a term that translates not simply as arms-bearer or servant, but as a ritual companion, a confidant, a second self. In the Achaean camp, their tent was a single space. It was Patroclus who took care of Achilles' horses, Xanthus and Balius. It was he who mixed the wine for their conversations, and he was the first to see the anger and sorrow of the greatest of warriors. He was his conscience, his reflection, the part of his soul that remained human, while the other part strove for divine immortality. For 9 long years, the Achaean army besieged Troy. For 9 years, the warriors plundered the surrounding cities, fought in exhausting battles, and longed for home. Fatigue and irritation hung in the air of the camp like dust kicked up by thousands of sandals. All it took was a spark to ignite the fire, and that spark was the conflict between the two most powerful figures in the Greek army. It all began with the wrath of the gods. Agamemnon, the supreme leader of the Achaeans, captured Chryseis, the daughter of Apollo's priest. When her father came with a rich ransom, Agamemnon haughtily sent him away. The offended priest prayed to his god, and Apollo sent a plague upon the Greek camp. Soldiers died by the hundreds. Funeral pyres burned day and night, and the stench of death filled the air. The seer Calchas, with Achilles' protection, discovered the cause of the disaster. At a general assembly, Achilles publicly demanded that Agamemnon return the girl to her father. Agamemnon, wounded in his pride, agreed, but on one condition. In return, he would take Achilles' military trophy, the beautiful captive Briseis. For a hero of that era, this was not just the loss of a woman. It was public humiliation, deprivation of tima, honor, recognition of his merits. Briseis was a symbol of his valor, proof that he was the best of the Achaeans. To take her away meant to question his status and his value. Bright sunlight illuminates the gathering. Agamemnon, his face contorted with rage, points at Achilles.
Do you want me to be the only one left without a reward? No, I will take yours so that you understand who is in charge here. Achilles' hand falls on the hilt of his sword. Another moment, and the supreme leader's blood would have stained the sand. But an invisible force stops him. It is the goddess Athena, appearing only to him, grabbing him by his blonde hair and whispering, "Restrain yourself. Insult him with words, not with your sword." Achilles, breathing heavily, withdraws his hand. His eyes flash with lightning. He obeys the goddess, but his anger finds another outlet. He makes a terrible oath. Neither he nor his myrmidons will ever again take to the battlefield. He refuses to fight for those who have dishonored him. He goes to his tent by the sea and calls out to his mother, the sea goddess Thetis, begging her to ask Zeus to grant victory to the Trojans, so that the Achaeans will crawl on their knees to ask him for help and realize who they have lost. Thus began the wrath of Achilles, which became the starting point for the entire Iliad. Greece's greatest warrior locked himself in his tent, playing the lyre and watching his compatriots perish under Hector's onslaught. Only one man shared his pain and silence, Patroclus. For Achilles, the war had ended. But for everyone else, it was entering its bloodiest phase. In his grief, Achilles turned to his mother with words full of pain and wounded pride. "Mother, if you gave birth to me for a short life, then the thunderous thunderer Zeus Olympus could have endowed me with glory. Now he does not honor me in the slightest. The son of Atreus, the mighty lord Agamemnon, has dishonored me. He himself took my precious reward and keeps it." Days turned into weeks. In Achilles' tent, time flowed differently, thick and viscous like honey. He sat at the entrance, strumming the strings of his silver lyre and singing of the glory of ancient heroes, of battles that were purer and more honest than this one. And behind the thin fabric of the tent, reality was becoming increasingly cruel. The absence of the Myrmidons, the elite of the Achaean army, and their godlike leader, gave the Trojans free rein. Hector, the great leader of Troy, sensed the enemy's weakness. He no longer defended himself. He attacked. With each passing day, his warriors came closer and closer to the Greek ships, the last line of defense, beyond which lay only the sea and a shameful retreat. Patroclus could not sit idly by. While Achilles reveled in his anger, Patroclus walked around the camp. He saw the wounded being carried away and heard the moans of the dying. His hands, trained by Chiron not only to hold a spear but also to extract arrows, were constantly at work. He washed wounds, applied healing herbs, and listened. He listened to stories of how Diomedes, like a lion, single-handedly held back the onslaught. How old Nestor tried to inspire the faltering warriors. How the great Ajax, shielding himself with his tower-like shield, stood to the death at the very rampart defending the camp. And in each story there was a longing for one name: Achilles. Once the wounded Eurypylus, a valiant warrior with an arrow piercing his thigh, was brought to him. Patroclus carefully cut out the arrowhead, washed the wound with warm water, and sprinkled it with a bitter, pain-relieving root. Eurypylus, grimacing in pain, looked at him and asked, "How long will he remain in his tent? Hector swears that he will set fire to our ships today. We will all perish here on this cursed shore because of one man's pride." These words pierced Patroclus's heart deeper than the arrow pierced Eurypylus's thigh. He saw not just a wounded soldier. He saw the despair of the entire army reflected in his eyes. Meanwhile, the leaders of the Achaeans, driven to extremes, decided on a final attempt. They assembled an embassy. Not just messengers, but those who could touch Achilles' heart. The cunning Odysseus, a master of
persuasion. The mighty Ajax, Telamon, his comrade in arms and second only to Achilles himself in strength. And old Phoenix, who had nursed Achilles in his arms when he was a child and loved him like his own son. When they entered the tent, Achilles put down his lyre and stood up to greet them.
There was no hostility in his eyes, only cold detachment. Patroclus, silent and tense, immediately bustled about, showing hospitality. He placed bowls before the guests, mixed sparkling wine in a crater, and cut meat roasted over charcoal. This ritual was sacred, but the tension in the air was palpable. Odysseus spoke first. He spoke at length and skillfully, painting a picture for Achilles of the dire situation of the Achaeans. He listed the gifts that Agamemnon had promised: 7 tripods, 10 talents of gold, 20 shining cauldrons, 12 victorious horses, and of course Briseis, whom Agamemnon had sworn to return unharmed, along with 7 other skilled slave girls and one of his daughters as a wife. Odysseus appealed to his glory, his duty, his compassion. "Even if you hate Agamemnon," he said, "have pity on the other Danaans who are perishing in battle. They will welcome you as a god. What glory can you gain by killing Hector now, who in his madness is rushing towards the ships?" Achilles listened without interrupting, his face impenetrable as a mask. When Odysseus finished, he replied, and his answer was terrible in its finality. He spoke not of gifts, he spoke of lies and betrayal. "I hate, as I hate the gates of Hades, those who hide one thing in their hearts and say another with their tongues," his voice thundered. He rejected all gifts, declaring that no treasure could compensate for the insult to his honor. He said that life was more precious to him than any glory won for ungrateful leaders. And for the first time, he said something that shocked everyone. He told them about his mother's prophecy. He was destined to choose one of 2 fates.
Either return home and live a long but inglorious life, or remain at Troy, die young, and gain eternal glory. "Before," he said, "I would have chosen glory. But now that I see that the brave and the cowardly receive an equal share, I choose life. Tomorrow at dawn I will launch my ships and sail home." Patroclus, standing nearby, turned pale. He saw his friend's world crumbling, his friend rejecting the very essence of the heroic code by which they lived. Then old Phoenix stepped forward. Tears streamed down his wrinkled cheeks. He did not speak of gifts. He spoke of the past. He reminded Achilles how he had carried him as a baby in his arms, how he had fed him, how he had capriciously stained his clothes with wine. He spoke like a father begging his son to quell his destructive anger. He told him an ancient parable about the hero Meleager, who, equally angry with his kinsman, locked himself in his house until enemies approached the walls of his native city. And when the elders, priests, and even his own wife begged him to go out and fight, he refused. Only when the enemies were already setting fire to his house did he join the battle and save the city. But he received neither the rewards nor the gratitude that had been offered to him earlier. "Don't be like that, my child," cried Phoenix. "Don't wait until the fire reaches our ships. Accept the gifts and save us all." Achilles' heart trembled at the sight of the old man's tears, but his decision remained unshakable. He suggested that Phoenix stay with him and sail back to their homeland together. Finally, Ajax could not hold back any longer and exploded. He was a warrior, not an orator. His words were harsh and direct. He addressed Odysseus, not Achilles, as if speaking about him in the third person. "Let us leave this place. This man has turned his heart to stone. He does not honor the friendship of his comrades, whom we held in higher esteem than anyone else at the ships."
Cruel! People accept ransom even for a slain brother or son. And he was offered countless gifts for one girl, but he rejects them because of his malicious pride. These words may have hurt Achilles the most because they were true, but they only strengthened his resolve. He acknowledged Ajax's rightness, but declared that his heart boiled with rage at the mere memory of how Agamemnon had humiliated him in front of the entire army. He put an end to the matter. I will not enter the battle until the great Hector reaches the tents of the Myrmidons and sets fire to our ships. But at my tent, I think he will stop his fury." The embassy left empty-handed. A heavy silence fell over the tent. Patroclus saw how his friend, the greatest of mortals, had imprisoned himself in anger and pride. And he understood that words were powerless. Now fire and blood would have to speak. And that day came. The Trojans, led by Hector, whom Zeus himself had endowed with superhuman strength, broke through the wall protecting the Greek camp. The battle was already raging among the ships. A cry of horror swept through the camp when the first Achaean ship burst into flames. It was the end. It was a catastrophe. At that moment, Patroclus, his face wet with tears, ran up to Achilles. He could no longer remain silent. His voice broke with grief and despair. "O Achilles, son of Peleus, strongest of the Achaeans! Do not be angry with me. Such grief has befallen us. All our best warriors lie wounded by the ships. Diomedes, Odysseus, Agamemnon, Eurypylus. But you, relentless, nurse your resentment. May such anger as possesses you not take hold of me. Cruel-hearted one, Peleus was not your father, nor Thetis your mother. You were born of the gray sea and the inaccessible rocks, since you have such a wild spirit." He spoke, gasping for breath. He begged, he accused. And then he uttered the fateful words that changed everything.
"But if you fear some prophecy and do not want to go into battle yourself, then at least let me go. Give me your Myrmidon troops, and give me your armor. Perhaps the Trojans will mistake me for you, retreat from the ships, and we, the sons of the Achaeans, will be able to catch our breath." Achilles looked at his friend. He saw his face distorted with suffering, his eyes full of tears for others. And the wall of his anger, which neither gifts nor pleas nor threats could break through, cracked. He could not break his oath, but the thought that the fire would touch his own ship and the sight of the despair of the person closest to him made him look for a way out. He agreed, but his consent was full of dark forebodings. He himself helped Patroclus put on his armor, which was known to all, both Greeks and Trojans. A shining helmet with a horse's crest, a breastplate decorated with gold, greaves, and the famous shield forged by Hephaestus. He gave him everything except his spear made of Pelian ashwood. No one but Achilles himself could lift it. When Patroclus stood before him, shining in divine armor, Achilles gave his last instruction, his order, which was both a blessing and a curse. "Patroclus, listen to me carefully, so that you may win great honor and glory for me. When you drive the Trojans away from the ships, return immediately. Do not dare, in your fighting fervor, to rush towards the walls of Troy without me. You will only diminish my glory. And beware that one of the eternal gods does not enter the battle, especially Apollo, the archer, for he loves the Trojans. Return as soon as you bring salvation to the ships. Let the others continue the battle on the plain." He said this, but an icy fear had already settled in his heart. He watched as Patroclus, shining and beautiful like Ares, the god of war, led the Myrmidons out of their long inaction. He watched as his friend, his second self, rushed into the thick of battle to save those he had cursed. He saw the Trojans, seeing his armor, tremble and run, mistaking Patroclus for Achilles risen from his wrath. He saw the smoke receding from the ships and heard the victorious cry of the Achaeans. He saw the triumph, but he did not know that he had just sent the most precious part of his soul to its death with his own hands, and that the anger he had nurtured for so long would soon seem like a mere speck of dust compared to the grief and fury that would burn him from within.
The Myrmidons, seeing the familiar silhouette in shining armor, roared with delight. Their inaction, like stagnant water, gave way to a torrential flow. They poured out from behind the fortifications, fresh, full of strength and fury, led by a figure that every Trojan knew and feared. The illusion was perfect. Primitive, chilling terror gripped the Trojan army. They did not see Patroclus. They saw the incarnation of Achilles' wrath returned to punish them for their audacity. The formation faltered, the ranks mingled. Those who a moment ago had been setting fire to the Greek ships with victorious cries now sought salvation in panic, throwing down their spears and shields. Patroclus felt the power contained in the armor flow into his veins. It was not just steel and leather. It was the aura of the greatest warrior, his glory, his kleos. He drove the chariot, drawn by Achilles' immortal horses, straight into the thick of the enemy, where the panic was strongest. His spear never missed its mark. He fought with a fury born of despair and love for his comrades. He wanted to prove to Achilles and to himself that he was worthy of this honor. He fought for two, for himself and for the one who remained in the tent. In the chaos of the retreat, one of Troy's most powerful allies appeared before him, Sarpedon, king of the Lycians, son of Zeus himself. Their eyes met above the bodies of the fallen. It was not just a duel between two warriors. It was the point where the fates of mortals and the will of the gods intersected. On Olympus, Zeus, looking down on the battlefield, groaned. He saw that his beloved son was destined to fall at the hands of Patroclus. The father's heart was breaking. He turned to his wife Hera, wondering aloud whether he should kidnap Sarpedon from the battlefield, changing what was destined to be. But Hera was unyielding. "If you save your son," she said, "then other gods will want to save their children, and you will bring chaos to the established order of things. Let him fall, but after the battle, send death and sleep to carry his body back to his homeland in Lycia, where he will be honored with a tomb and a monument." With a heavy heart, the Thunderer agreed. And when Sarpedon and Patroclus clashed in battle, bloody raindrops fell from the heavens to the earth. Thus Zeus mourned his mortal son. The duel was fierce, but fate had been decided. Patroclus hurled his spear, and it pierced Sarpedon's shield and lodged in his chest. Falling like a felled mountain oak, the son of Zeus made a last effort to call on his warriors not to leave his body to be desecrated. His death was the pinnacle of Patroclus's triumph. He had accomplished what many great Achaeans had failed to do, and in that moment of victory-induced intoxication he forgot everything. He forgot Achilles' warning. The warning to return to the ships evaporated from his memory, supplanted by the roar of battle and the taste of blood on his lips. He felt invincible, equal to the gods. He saw only fleeing enemies and the high walls of Troy before him. And a mad, daring thought was born in his soul. What if he, Patroclus, could do what the entire Achaean army had failed to do in 10 years? What if he was destined to take Troy? It was hubris, the pride that had destroyed the greatest heroes.
He drove his horses forward, onto the plain, towards the city itself, drawing the enthusiastic Myrmidons behind him. 4 times he approached the foot of the high wall, and 4 times he was thrown back by the invisible hand of Apollo himself, the patron of Troy. The god, shrouded in a dark cloud, thundered menacingly, "Retreat, Patroclus, descendant of the gods. It is not your destiny to destroy the city of the proud Trojans with your spear, nor even that of Achilles, who far surpasses you." But Patroclus, blinded by his own glory, did not hear. He saw only a weak spot in the defense, a breach where he could break through. And then Apollo decided to act. He took the form of a Trojan warrior and appeared before Hector, who at that moment was desperately trying to gather his retreating troops. "Hector," said the god, "why have you left the battle? Look, Patroclus is already at the walls. Drive your chariot towards him, and perhaps Apollo will grant you glory." The god's words inspired Hector with new courage. He turned his horses around and rushed towards his destiny. Patroclus, seeing Hector rushing towards him, jumped out of his chariot. He picked up a heavy stone from the ground and hurled it, striking Hector's charioteer Cebrion right in the forehead. He fell down dead. A terrible battle broke out around the body. But while the warriors fought over the fallen man, Apollo, invisible to all, approached Patroclus from behind. He struck him a terrible blow with his palm on the back. The world swayed before the hero's eyes. Achilles' helmet, the very helmet that had never before touched the dust, flew off his head and rolled on the ground. His shield fell, the straps of his armor broke, and he was left virtually defenseless. The spear in his hand shattered into pieces. His mind was clouded. At that moment, as he stood stunned and disarmed, a young Trojan warrior named Euphorbus crept up behind him and thrust a spear between his shoulder blades. But even he did not dare to face Patroclus face to face and immediately jumped back into the crowd. The wound was not fatal, but it deprived Patroclus of his last strength. He stumbled back, seeking refuge among his own men. And then Hector stood before him. He saw his enemy, wounded, unarmed, deprived of divine protection. Without hesitation, he thrust his spear into his stomach. Patroclus fell with a dull thud. Hector placed his foot on his chest and exclaimed triumphantly, "Did you think, Patroclus, that you would destroy our city and take our wives into slavery? Fool! I, Hector, will defend them, and you will be pecked at by vultures." But Patroclus, dying, gained the gift of prophecy. Gathering his last strength, he whispered, "You will not live long. Death and mighty fate are already standing beside you, waiting to fall at the hand of the flawless Aeacus Achilles." With these words his soul left his body and flew to the kingdom of Hades, lamenting his fate, to leave his youth and strength behind. Patroclus' death did not end the battle. It began its most terrible phase. Hector was the first to strip Achilles' armor from the fallen warrior. It was the greatest trophy, a symbol of complete victory. He put it on himself, and for a moment it seemed to him that Achilles' strength had passed to him. But a superhuman battle broke out over the body. The Achaeans, led by Menelaus and Ajax, could not allow the corpse of their comrade to be trampled by dogs and birds. They stood over him like a wall, and the ground around them was soaked with blood. This was no longer a battle for glory or for ships. It was a battle for the honor of the dead, for the right to commit a friend to the earth. Meanwhile, Achilles sat by his tent, gazing into the distance. He saw that the Trojans had been repelled, but anxiety gripped his heart. He did not see the returning chariot, nor did he hear Patroclus's victorious cry. He saw only clouds of dust and heard the incessant roar of battle, which for some reason did not subside, but only grew with new force. Antilochus, son of old Nestor, the fastest of the Achaeans, ran to him. His face was black with dust and tears. He ran up to Achilles and, gasping for breath, uttered the terrible words, "Son of Peleus, I bring terrible news. Patroclus is dead, and Hector has your armor." Achilles' world collapsed. Sound disappeared. Colors faded. A black cloud of inexpressible grief enveloped him. He scooped up the coastal dust, black ash, with both hands, and sprinkled it on his head, staining his beautiful face and divine clothes.
Then he collapsed to the ground and wept in despair, tearing at his hair. His cry was inhuman, so full of pain that his mother, the goddess Thetis, heard it in the depths of the sea. She rose from the waves like mist, surrounded by her sisters, the Nereids, and sat down next to her weeping son, resting her head on his knees. "My child, what is wrong with you?" she asked. "What sorrow has befallen your heart?" And Achilles told her everything. About his anger, about the death of Patroclus, about the shame of lost armor. But there was no longer any resentment towards Agamemnon in his voice. All his former rage now seemed like a childish whim. It had been replaced by something else, something much darker and more all-consuming, a thirst for revenge. "I don't want to live," he said to his mother, "if I cannot strike Hector with my spear and make him pay for Patroclus's death." Thetis, weeping, replied with words that confirmed his fate. "If you kill Hector, your hour of death will be near." Achilles looked at her with eyes that no longer showed fear of death. "So be it," he replied. "I am ready to die right now. I was not there to protect my friend. He died far from his homeland, needing me as his protector from death. Now I will return. I will meet the killer of my dear friend, Hector. And then I will accept my death whenever Zeus and the other immortal gods decide to send it." At that moment, Achilles' anger was transformed. It was no longer directed at his compatriots. He had found a single purpose. The hero who had chosen a long life died with Patroclus. In his place was born an avenger, ready to burn the whole world to the ground to get to his enemy. He accepted his fate, and this determination was more terrifying than any weapon. The war, which had changed with the death of Patroclus, was now about to change again with the return of Achilles, maddened by grief. But his decision was only a word thrown in the face of fate. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the fate of what remained of Patroclus was being decided. 12 times the Trojans and the Achaeans clashed over his body, and with each onslaught the earth became more and more crimson. Hector, already clad in Achilles' divine armor, broke through to the corpse 3 times, wanting to cut off its head and carry it away on a pole as a banner of his victory. And 3 times he was thrown back by the wall of shields, closed by the great Ajax, who stood over Patroclus like a lioness over her cubs, not allowing the hunters to approach. The forces of the Achaeans were running out. They retreated step by step, carrying their precious burden in their arms, but the ring of enemies was closing in. It seemed that in a moment the body would be lost forever. At this critical moment, the goddess Hera, unable to watch the defeat of her favorites, sent the messenger Iris to Achilles. She appeared to him secretly, invisible to others, and her words were like the crack of a whip. "Arise, son of Peleus, most terrible of mortals. Protect Patroclus, for whom a terrible battle is being fought by the ships. Shame will fall upon you if the Trojan dogs tear his body apart." Achilles looked up at her with eyes full of anguish and replied, "How can I go? My armor is with the enemy.
And my mother has forbidden me to enter the battle until she brings me new weapons from Hephaestus." But Iris was insistent. "We know you have no armor, but just go out to the trench and show yourself to the Trojans. The mere sight of you, filled with terror, will make them retreat, and the Achaeans will get a respite." And Achilles obeyed. He climbed onto the edge of the ditch separating the camp from the battlefield. He wore no armor, but around his head the goddess Athena herself had lit a golden shining cloud from which tongues of flame burst forth. He stood there, motionless and terrifying, and let out a cry. It was not a warrior's battle cry. It was a cry of pure, undiluted grief, amplified by the divine power of Athena, and it swept across the plain like the sound of a trumpet heralding the end of the world. The Trojans froze. A horror, inhuman and icy, gripped their hearts. The horses in the chariots, sensing something supernatural, began to snort and rear up, throwing off their drivers. Achilles cried out a second time, and panic seized the enemy ranks. When he let out a third, deafening cry, the Trojan ranks finally collapsed. They fled, throwing down their weapons, forgetting about glory and the body they had just fought for. In the ensuing chaos, the Achaeans picked up Patroclus's body unhindered and carried it to their tents. When the lifeless body was brought into the tent, the Myrmidons surrounded it, weeping. Achilles stood among them, heavy sighs escaping from his chest. He laid his hands, the hands of a murderer, on the chest of the friend whom he himself had sent to his death. The warriors washed the body, anointed it with olive oil, and covered the wounds. They laid him on a funeral bed and covered him with a thin white veil from head to toe. All night they sat around him, and Achilles led them in mournful weeping. But he himself refused all rituals. He did not wash the dust and caked blood from his body, nor did he touch food or wine. He just sat next to his dead friend and made terrible oaths, addressing his silent shadow. "Rejoice, Patroclus, even in the kingdom of Hades. I will fulfill all that I have promised. Hector will not be buried until I bring his head and armor here. And by your pyre I will behead the 12 noblest youths of Troy in my rage over your murder." His grief ceased to be human. It turned into a monstrous, cold ritual of revenge. Meanwhile, Thetis reached Olympus. She found Hephaestus in his copper forge, lame, powerful, covered in sweat. Golden automaton maids bustled around him, and 20 bellows automatically fanned the fire in the furnaces. The blacksmith god owed his life to Thetis. When Hera, horrified by her son's ugliness, threw him from Olympus, it was Thetis and Eurynome who caught him and hid him in an underwater grotto for 9 years. He had not forgotten this. After listening to the goddess's tearful plea for new armor for her doomed son, he replied without hesitation, "Do not worry. I would like to protect him from a noisy death as much as I am sure that I will create armor for him that all mortals will admire." And he set to work. He threw indestructible copper, tin, precious silver, and gold into the fire. He set up a huge anvil and took a massive hammer in his hands. First, he began to forge a shield, huge, 5-layered, with a triple shining rim. And on this shield he depicted not scenes of war, but life itself, the entire universe as it should be. In the center he placed the earth, the sky and the sea, the tireless sun, the full moon, and all the constellations. Then he depicted 2 cities of mortals. In one there were weddings and feasts, brides leaving their homes by torchlight, young men dancing to the sounds of flutes and lyres. In the town square he showed a court. 2 men were arguing over the ransom for a murdered man, and the elders, sitting on smooth stones in a sacred circle, held scepters in their hands and delivered their verdict. It was a city of peace and law. The second city was surrounded by enemies. Wives, old men, and children stood on the walls while the warriors went out to battle. He depicted an ambush by the river, shepherds playing flutes and unaware of the danger, herds of cows and sheep, and a bloody battle in which the gods themselves, Ares and Athena, took part. He forged on the shield a soft field that had been plowed 3 times, and reapers walking across the field with sharp sickles, and a vineyard laden with clusters, and young men and women dancing in a circle. It was a world that Achilles had lost forever, a world he was about to destroy with his vengeance. The shield was not just a defense, it was an epitaph to his own humanity, a mirror reflecting everything he had renounced. When morning came, Thetis descended from Olympus like a hawk, carrying the god's gift to her son. The armor shone brighter than fire. When the Myrmidons saw it, they dared not raise their eyes, overcome with reverential awe. Only Achilles looked at them, and his anger grew stronger, and an unkind light flashed in his eyes. He accepted the gift and called a general assembly of the Achaeans. For the first time in a long time, he appeared before the army. He was brief. He announced that his anger at Agamemnon was over. Now his fury had another target. Agamemnon gave a long, confused speech, blaming the goddess of deception, Athena, and once again offered Achilles all the promised gifts. Servants brought gold, tripods, horses, and led Briseis before him. Achilles looked at all this with complete indifference. His mind was preoccupied with one thing. Gifts are good, Agamemnon, Lord of men. They can be accepted or rejected. But now is not the time for long speeches. We have work to do. I want to see the Trojans fall to the dust from my spear. He did not crave justice or wealth. He craved blood. And the whole army, looking at him, clad in armor shining like a star, saw before them not a man, but a living instrument of divine retribution. The death of Patroclus not only drove Achilles mad, but also became the catalyst that changed the course of the Trojan War. This story from the Iliad reminds us of the power of human emotions, friendship, rage, and revenge, and their ability to influence history. Centuries later, it continues to resonate, emphasizing that even in myths, personal dramas remain timeless and instructive.